Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk, exploring the issues affecting all of our lives. I'm your host, Austin Harris. Today it is our pleasure to welcome back the Deputy Leader of the Opposition and Shadow Minister for the Ministries of Commerce, the Environment, Transport and Housing, Planning and Lands, the Honourable Joseph Joey Hew. Last time we chatted, we had a very informative discussion on the landfill and the solution that has taken decades to arrive at, namely the Regen initiative. Today, we hope to take on another similar matter of national importance, and that is the always controversial, if not greatly misunderstood topic of development, and is Cayman developing too quickly? Mr. Hew, welcome to Let's Talk. It's a pleasure to have you back as our guest in studios.
Thank you, Austin. It's a pleasure to be back, and I have to tell you that I've been enjoying your segments. They're refreshing and very informative, and I'm looking forward to some engaging conversation as usual today.
Well, thank you very much, sir. You know, it all depends on the guest, and you make a fantastic guest. So again, we welcome you back to Let's Talk. Well, let's talk. You know, I think you've had many accomplishments during your term as minister, and you certainly introduced a number of initiatives that undoubtedly have moved this country forward. One such initiative is the Plan Cayman initiative,
Yes.
which sought to tackle the real concern of overdevelopment, both in terms of housing and hotels, but likewise its impact on existing infrastructure like roads and therefore traffic, like landfill and waste management, like we talked about the last time. Perhaps you can begin with an overview of Plan Cayman, particularly for our audience members who, may be hearing about it for the first time.
Yeah. Thank you, Austin. And you're absolutely right. The Plan Cayman sought to address the issue of the National Development Plan and a review of that plan. The law actually calls for that plan to be reviewed every 5 years. Now, the last review of the plan was in 1997. So it's long overdue, and government after government after government tried to review the plan and to get in line with the law. However, one of the big issues is that it's a huge undertaking to try and get the entire plan done in a 4-year period,
Yes.
even though the law does calls for it to be reviewed every 5 years. So the staff at the planning office in the department, we sat down and chatted, and we said, how do we, this is of major importance. It was certainly one of my key initiatives when I became minister, was to review this National Development Plan. And I sat down and said, how can we achieve this? How do we do this? And the idea came up that we break the island up into 5 different zones, and we review one zone each year. Thus, at the end of the 5 years, you would have completed a full review of Grand Cayman. The National Development Plan, by the way, only covers Grand Cayman. And so we decided we would take that course. It made sense. We know that we could accomplish the review of one zone per year. And at the end of 5 years, we would have completed a full review of the National Development Plan. And the beauty about this too is that we could actually switch around which zone we review based on perhaps speed of growth or new industries or something. So you didn't have to wait until the end of 5 years to do the entire country, which would take about 4 years to do, for 5 years to do.
Yes.
And then during that time, things have changed in different districts, as we've seen happen. We've seen growth in some districts. We've seen a slowdown in some districts. We've seen districts change into more residential areas, while others went into more industrial areas. And these are the sorts of things that the National Development Plan that's an overarching plan that guides the planning department, and in particular the planning board, in carrying out their duties. And Austin, this was so important. It was so important for the people of the Cayman Islands to be involved in this process. And so we came up with Plan Cayman. We first developed, it took us about a year to develop the national planning framework, which would be the guiding document for the review process. We selected 7 Mile Beach as the first zone to do.
Excellent.
As we know that there are issues there because the review would be so encompassing, as you mentioned earlier. We needed to deal with rising sea levels, climate change, beach accesses, even things like public areas along the 7 Mile Beach, open public spaces, safer and wider sidewalks. All of these things were we saw as pressing issues, and we chose 7 Mile Beach to begin with. Unfortunately, so just as we got through with the national planning framework, we were going to public consultation, and the theme was that this is your plan, your future. And the idea was we'd go to public consultation on 7 Mile Beach over a period of months, using all forms of outreach to the public, including town hall meetings, etc. And we felt that during the COVID shelter-in-place time, it would not have gotten the sort of traction that we would like it to have. We really, really wanted this document to be a document that brought the vision of the people of Cayman Islands into our national planning framework.
Indeed. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the public consultation process, because I noticed upon reading Plan Cayman that it took its rise from a number of other public consultations, specifically the Vision 2001 reports that went district by district in Cayman and sought to, encourage feedback from our citizens, particularly those who live in the various districts, in terms of what kind of development they would like to see in their districts. Would you say that Plan Cayman on itself is also another people-driven initiative?
That was the intention of it. And even just the national planning framework that we did, we had 2,000 comments on the public consultation for that when we published that document for feedback. We had 2,000 comments, some 300 and almost 360 respondents. So we had good feedback. We had great public interaction when developing that document. And included in developing the development of that framework, we included the National Tourism Plan, which had just been completed. We included things like the elderly persons policy that the government had just completed. We took into consideration several other reports that had been done over the years, using all of those to create what we call that planning framework, so that we could go out to the public and say, here's what all the reports have been saying. Yeah. Here is where we were, here's where we're going. What are your thoughts?
Right.
How can we address this better for you?
Indeed. Now, Plan Cayman intends to cover some 13 topics, everything from land use to infrastructure, and to take into account, as you said, the concern that we're developing too quickly. One of the areas included in Plan Cayman is housing, and in particular, the need to provide housing at all income levels. Now, this, I think, is an extremely relevant topic, as is, of course, the 7 Mile Beach corridor. But housing right now certainly seems to be in significant deficit. What are your thoughts on, again, the need for this initiative to deal with the current needs that people, our citizens, are struggling with?
Again, everyone is looking at the planning board. They were calling, remove the planning board, we need an entirely new planning board. Well, they just about did that, and what were the results the same? Because the planning board is guided by the National Development Plan. They cannot create new laws at the planning board. They cannot break the laws at the planning board. And so to deal with the housing, our experience, what we saw in the boom was the two key impacts on our local housing was the economic substance legislation that the EU brought, which I think was intended to perhaps steal business away from Cayman, and where the EU said if you had a company registered in Cayman, you actually have to have a presence there. You have to have an office, a desk, and a person, a warm body there. Yeah. Companies decided that doing business in the Cayman Islands was worth it to actually have an office here. So that created an influx of not only hiring of Caymanians, but also the importation of specialists in those areas and from their head offices, which required housing. The second one was the advent of the Airbnb, and this was key. We saw an increase of about 20% in stay-over tourism at a time when we had no new hotel rooms several years ago. And that was all because of Airbnb. And that is persons that come to the island and individuals who own apartments or homes put up a room or the entire apartment or entire home for rent to tourists, for stay over tourists. Persons coming to do business as well over short periods of time or setting up the offices would also use these Airbnb accommodations. And so we saw a lot of people that would normally put their housing for sale in the local pool or for rent in the long-term local pool went towards using it for Airbnb accommodations. And that is going to continue to grow. If you were to ever go on a website, you would just see exactly how many places in Grand Cayman alone are listed on Airbnb. So zoning is the only way to deal with that. So when you review the National Development Plan, you zone areas that you say you cannot carry out any sort of tourism business, for instance. Mm-hmm. You zone areas that only these types of homes can be built or this density of homes. Mm-hmm. And that is the way that you start to drive the market back towards providing housing for the local market. That is one of the ways. The second way, of course, is an entirely different conversation, and that is incentivizing local developers, local landowners to build on their land to rent in the local market. And you do that through providing them with duty concessions. You do that through providing them with concessions through planning, providing 10-year leases for needs assessment to use for the children family services, et cetera, to use for government housing. Yes. There's a myriad of ways that you can incentivize persons to build accommodations for the local market. And then, of course, they would agree that they would rent their places locally. They would not put it in Airbnb, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're empowering Caymanians as well, giving them an opportunity to develop on their own properties. The other aspect of that, which is very important for me, is that rather than National Housing Development Trust building large-scale homes in one area and versus having people moving in across the island, is that you get there's better chances for social diversification. Yeah. So that you're not taking everyone from one social or one economic position and putting them all in one place. Yes. But if you're to develop properties around the island, allowing Caymanians to invest, to make returns on their properties, and then you have the social diversification as well. So these are some of the projects that we were working on. We did a multi-agency task force, including the needs assessment, children family services, planning, health, everyone. We had a multi-agency task force. We did several roundtable discussions with industry, from contractors to the utility companies, realtors, you name it. This was headed up through the governor's office, deputy governor's office, with myself and the Honorable Dwayne Seymour at the time as the co-chairs. Yes. And we had made great progress just prior to COVID once again. Yeah. But these are the sorts of ideas that I would encourage the government to take on board in addressing this issue. I am concerned now that more focus is based on the environment, which is equally as important, if not more at the moment. Yes. And I know that they've formed a committee to review and make recommendations for changes on the National Development Plan. That is patchwork. The Bible even tells you, thou shalt not sow old wineskins with new wineskins. Right. And if you have rust, you don't just deal with one little spot at a time. You have, the National Development Plan is a document, it's a beast that has to be addressed holistically and all at once, because there's so many other laws and so many other things that it affects. So if you're just going to deal with the environment and you start talking about setbacks, well then how does that affect access for fire trucks, and how does that affect the building height? How does that affect properties? So there's so many things, so many more things that you have to take into consideration, because one will affect the other. So, I am concerned that if it is that this committee will be just making short-term recommendations to accommodate the desires of the government from an environmental perspective. What will be the unintended consequences of that, and delaying what the Premier recently said now, delaying what he thinks would be a full review of the National Development Plan some 4 or 5 years from now.
Indeed. Plan Cayman also seeks to take into account a number of environmental factors. And again, I think you alluded to a few of them momentarily. One of them, of course, is coastal impacts, beach erosion, for lack of a better word. You also mentioned that Plan Cayman would have originally begun on 7 Mile Beach, which I think is very timely because when we look at 7 Mile Beach today, perhaps most pressing is the concern of beach erosion. And I think we have some images of what's happening along the 7 Mile Beach corridor right now. Obviously, concerns with some of the setbacks required in development projects. But I must ask you, Mother Nature being what she is, a lot of these developments already being in the ground, is it really possible to rewind the clock, particularly as it relates to the concern of beach erosion?
Very interesting point, Austin, and I have to at this point, I try not to be too political, but at this point I do have to be a little political in saying that had the government not played politics with Plan Cayman and the rhetoric that was surrounding it, they could have already completed the 1 year public consultation on 7 Mile Beach and could at this point actually be starting to implement changes in National Development Plan in regards to Zone 1 7 Mile Beach that we had decided. So, but it is time, and the whole intention of, and that's exactly as you said, the reason we chose 7 Mile Beach was because we saw the issues there. And whilst we can't turn back the time, we can prevent future mistakes in development along 7 Mile Beach. And then we could also develop incentives for what you would call a voluntary retreat. To go to developers and say, hey, if you will remove your seawall, perhaps move your swimming pool back further, we will provide these incentives for you to do so, right? We want to work with you. We will have the planning department work with you versus what in the past have been the feeling that they're working against you. But we as a government, along with you, we have, people in 7 Mile Beach have invested millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Sure they have.
They do not want to see their investment falling into the sea. And so the whole idea was that we would go to them and do what we call a voluntary retreat and assist them in moving their seawalls or moving their swimming pools, as well as things like beach replenishment, etc. So those were the plans. Austin, if I could actually read to you.
Sure.
Again, Plan Cayman was your plan, your future, and we took everything into consideration. Some of the key goals, I just wanted to read these so I don't get them wrong. And persons can go on to the planning website. It's still there. Plan Cayman, the document is the national planning framework is still up. And we took into consideration things such as coastal zone management. That's goal 9.2 in the document. Sustainable transportation, 6.1, 6.5, 6.6, 6.7. It's mentioned throughout the document.
Right.
How important that is. The natural environment, goals 4.1 and 9.1. Site and building design, goal 8.1 and 8.2. Again, that's talking about how do you get incentivized persons to build further back, whilst utilizing and realizing their investment in their properties. Sustainable design and construction, goal 9.3. Electricity and street lighting, goal 7.7. And tourism zones, 3.6. Again, tourism zones, where you can or you cannot enter into the tourism business. So we also went on and placed a lot of focus on the importance of natural resources. And in natural resources preservation and overlay, goal 4.1. Environmental preservation, goal 9.1. Open spaces, goal 3.8. Coastal mangrove buffers, goal 3.9. Stormwater and drainage, goal 7.5. And parks, recreation, and open spaces, section 11. So we had covered all of those bases in the framework. And then we would go out to the public, we'd go out to everyone involved, private sector, public sector, environmentalists, developers, everybody to sit down and say, how do we achieve the best results for the future of our country, our environment, and of course we have to talk about your investment.
Yeah.
How do we do this? And that is what Plan Cayman was. And that is the whole idea behind Plan Cayman. And again, I just don't understand why the government haven't grabbed this and taken off running with it. It wasn't a Joey Hew document. It wasn't a PPM document.
Yes.
This was done by the young men and women in the planning department, and some very intelligent ones, I should say, as well. Put a lot of hard work, 2 years of hard work into realizing that document and getting us ready for Plan Cayman, our future, your plan, your future.
Mr. Hew, again, we've talked about the importance of this plan for the people of the Cayman Islands, Grand Cayman in particular. But a question that I guess doesn't get asked very often, why is it important to Joey Hew?
Yeah. Thank you, Austin. Again, like I said, this was a key initiative for me when I took office. It's not only just a national development plan, but also a national infrastructure plan that would guide the government in where they need to invest in infrastructure. But personally, I grew up in 7 Mile Beach for a while. My mother was a manager at one of the condos right there across from the old cinema. Cayman Sands, it's called. We used to, Smurf houses, people.
That's right.
So I roamed that beach. That was one of the widest parts of the beach before the Marriott was built. The Marriott was built while I was actually living there on 7 Mile Beach with my parents. And I saw the huge changes that that hotel made to that section of the beach. And then the house that was finally built at the end of the street at Cayman Sands, again with a seawall, and the drastic changes that that brought to the beach. And of course, all of this is in Georgetown North, in the area which I represent.
Yes.
But, you know, because I have the ability, and as a person that enjoys nature, person that cares about the environment, I am an avid gardener. I grow my own vegetables. I have my own chickens. I get my own eggs, you know, my own fruits. You know, I find for me, just like anyone else, I care about the environment. I care about our country. I care about 7 Mile Beach. I spent a lot of time in there. I knew where every fish was under every rock. And so it had a very personal impact on me, seeing the changes along 7 Mile Beach. And that is why I was so passionate and why it was so important for me to get this National Development Plan done, so that we could have that harmony and understanding. And you can't run away from development. You can't just take one side. Not in this position, or not in the position if you are the person responsible in the highest office of the country as far as lawmaking is concerned, as far as protection of the economy, protection of the environment. You have to be able to see it on both sides. And that is the balance that's needed. And that was my objective. That was our objective as a government, was to ensure that we kept that harmony while protecting our environment.
Mr. Hew, the Premier, the Honourable Wayne Panton, who is also the Minister of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency, I think it's called now, was recently quoted in the press as stating, and I quote, "Government will very soon be literally drawing a line in the sand on 7 Mile Beach," as he sought to address the erosion problems, whilst also citing plans of a renourishment initiative that's going to replace sand on 7 Mile Beach, but could take between 18 and 24 months. I have to ask, whilst again it sounds like a good initiative, and certainly to landowners as well as visiting tourists, yes, let's add more sand. But we talk about Mother Nature. She gives and then she takes away in seasonal times. Is this really the answer, is my question.
It's a part of the answer, Austin. And I think using the phrase "drawing a line in the sand," for me says two things. One is, yes, the physical. Where do we do the high water, or where do we do the high water setbacks from, or the setbacks from the high water mark or the vegetation line? It used to be from the vegetation line years ago, and those condos that you see that have further setbacks now and are enjoying a beautiful beach, those were built under the old laws. And then it moved some 20 years ago to setbacks from the high water mark, which then you can wait until low tide, you can wait until the full moon and it's sucking all the sea out, you can wait until seasonal times where you have less more beach, so your high water mark is further up. All of these things can be taken into play when a developer, a homeowner, or whomever decides to set their high water mark or register their high water mark for construction purposes. So drawing a line in the sand, I think you can go back historically. If we go back historically and look, we will know that yes, there was a movement of sand. There's always traditionally been seasonal movements of sand up and down 7 Mile Beach.
Yeah.
But you always saw that when it got to that vegetation line, that's where the erosion stopped. The vegetation held the beach there. Sometimes you would have 4 or 5 foot drops.
Right.
But that's where the erosion stopped. Occasionally a tree would fall in or something, but generally your vegetation line was a good rule of thumb. And if they can go back and look on the maps using historical data to try and set a line, as I think is what the Premier is saying, for future development, then you can do that. And I'm going to assume now that is one of the reviews that this committee is going to have, recommendations will have on the National Development Plan. It's important for me, I think, for us as a country, though, that when the government does this, that they do it in conjunction with private sector. How do we best, and again, like I said, go to some of those who, as you've said, we can't turn back time, but perhaps we can incentivize people to readjust their properties. And go to them and say, how can we assist you? What would make it feasible? I know that they've all discussed it in their board meetings. They've all discussed it in their strata meetings. So what can we do as a government to get you guys to make that commitment? How do we help to get you to make the commitment to a strategic retreat while we assist in the beach replenishment? So I do think that there is merit to it. I do think it's a good start. Yeah. It is certainly not the end all of end all or the answers to everything, but it is a good start, and it is a topic or a discussion in fact, the evidence is there as we speak.
Yes.
You don't have to be a scientist to see it, to say that we need to do something.
Absolutely. And it's encouraging that you obviously support the efforts by the Premier and his ministry. Sticking with the Premier, just in a final question, he has many strengths, but certainly he has demonstrated a passion for the environment and a concern for the environment, whether it be climate change, whether it be beach erosion, whatever. You mentioned quite correctly that he too was quoted in the press a few months ago stating that whether it be Plan Cayman or initiatives surrounding development, he may not be able to accomplish the introduction of the Plan Cayman initiative or even the amendments to the development plan during his 4-year term in office. And I think that really causes, a degree of concern. You mentioned earlier on also, quoting the Bible, you don't store old wine sacks with new wine sacks. What is your opinion, Mr. Hew, on the consequences of starting over on this development of Cayman initiative? And in particular, what are the consequences of amending an existing plan on the go?
So that's a big question, and that is whether it is just political. I appreciate that they campaigned. There was, comments that this was a developer's plan and that this was a plan that I wanted. No, I wanted a review of the National Development Plan, and I wanted the entire country to be a part of it, very similar to Vision 2008. And all we did was went out and said, what are the issues that concern you? And we got, like I said, over 2,000 comments, 460 something respondents, and then we created the National Planning Framework. That's all we did. It's a national planning framework that was created by the people of this country. The next step was to go out and do the public consultation on the specific areas as we identified. In his comments, he's actually admitting that it's almost impossible to do the entire island all at once within a term. Hence the reason, and he will not be the first government to fail at doing it, as I did. I can use COVID as an excuse, but no, we failed at doing it. Previous governments before me failed at doing it, but Plan Cayman was on the right track. This is our best opportunity to find a solution to this, and we have to evolve. One of the reason, even back then when things like climate change were not weren't talked about in 19, what was that, 97 when they last renewed it.
Yes.
You know, our issues were completely different then. And each year, year after year, look at the changes that 2 years of COVID have brought to the country. That is why it's so important that we review this plan every 5 years. That is why it's important that this document continues to grow, that the document continues to adjust with our country and the wishes and the needs of the people in our country. So years ago, Caymanians had no problem having property. They had tons of property, right? Unfortunately, most have sold it. Most have been developed. So that wasn't a major concern back then. When we start looking at industrial park in Georgetown, we know that it's overgrown. It's congested. Where will the next industrial park be? These are the sorts of things that we need to decide now.
Yes.
And we need to be able to adjust and move in the direction that the country is going in or the particular zone is going in, again, representing the wants and the needs of the people. And so for the life of me, I don't know why we're wasting time with a review committee to make several recommendations, and I assume those are recommendations surrounding the environment so that some of the protections can be put in place. But why not try to accomplish the entire thing, if not most of it, during this term by giving Plan Cayman, giving the people's plan an opportunity. Again, your plan, your future.
Indeed, sir. And certainly, Plan Cayman, I'm glad you mentioned it. It's a people-driven initiative.
Absolutely.
We talked about the concerns of completing a development review. Plan Cayman makes it easy by breaking it down into 5 separate sections, and certainly encouraging more and more public consultation. Mr. Hew, I want to thank you once again for being our guest here on Let's Talk. We hope, to our listening audiences anyway, that it was as enlightening and informative of our conversation as we thought it was. If you enjoyed today's episode, remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. If there's a discussion you would like us to present here on Let's Talk, please feel free to leave those suggestions along with any other comments on our YouTube channel. Also, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. for another episode of Let's Talk, exploring the issues affecting all of our lives. I'm your host, Austin Harris. Until next time.